Our top focus at this hour, even after reporting the highest daily jump in COVID-19 infections among the Tokyo Games participants in a day, the Olympics organisers have dismissed any link to the rising cases in Japan. At least 193 athletes, media and Olympic employees have now tested positive for the infection. These figures do not include some cases at airports and in training camps. For the first time, the daily infections figure topped 9,000 in Japan, when over 9,500 cases were reported nationwide on Wednesday itself. Days after the start of the Olympics, the daily cases in Tokyo were also at a record level with 3,179 cases. Now, International Olympic Committee spokesperson Mark Adams said that there was nothing to suggest a link between the Games and the rising figures. However, experts have warned that the rising number of cases could lead to a healthcare crisis. But authorities and organisers insist that the Games are not putting any additional pressure on Japan's medical system. Also adding that only 2 people associated with the Games are in hospital, and half of all those needing care are now being looked after by their own medical teams.
On the perception of how these Games are, I think it's very, very important with the Japanese public that we reassure them, and I'm sorry for those that have been here for many of the press conferences for me to go over this again, but you know about the amazing level of testing and the fact that, in fact, to a large extent, there is really no contact between the general public and the Games organisers on a day-to-day basis. It's very important.
A rapid rise in new infections is spurred by the more contagious Delta variant. Tokyo is already under a virus state of emergency with shortened restaurant and bar opening hours and also barring people from selling alcohol. But experts say that the limits so far do not appear to be working and have warned people not to drop their guard against the infection. Many Japanese have now raised concerns about the influx of athletes and officials for the Games and saying that these will add to the surge of the virus cases. While experts have warned that holding of the high-profile sports events sends a confusing message about the need to stay at home. According to Japan's chief cabinet secretary, the capital has never experienced such a fast spread of the coronavirus, while a top government advisor has warned that the current situation is worst ever.
東京を中心とする首都圏だけではなく、関西圏をはじめ全国の多くの地域で新規感染者数が増加傾向となっており、これまでに経験したことのない感染拡大となっていること。
The surge also spells trouble for Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, whose support ratings are at their lowest since he took office last September. Only 26.5% of residents of Japan are fully vaccinated, and the rollout has now hit the supply snags as well. For more on the latest developments happening at the Tokyo Games, WION's correspondent Phoebe Amoroso is now joining us live from Tokyo. Phoebe, thanks so much for joining us. Now, this seems to be a rather strange situation, an alarming rise in cases where at least 193 athletes, media and Olympic employees have now tested positive for the infection. And yet, even after reporting this highest daily jump in cases, the Tokyo Games organisers say there's no link between the holding of the Games and these rise in cases. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, well, it is causing a fair amount of controversy, and just today we heard from the top government advisor Shigeru Omi, who said the government and the Tokyo Olympic Committee must do everything within their power in order to convey the message to people. They need to be staying home more and avoiding contact, and they should be trying to the government should be trying to control this pandemic. As for whether there's a relationship or not, many believe that the atmosphere of holding the Olympics, it's created quite a sort of festive atmosphere, and it's sending very mixed messages. As you mentioned, yes, there are loads of athletes and staff moving around the city and indeed the country to other venues, whereas people are being asked to stay home. And there have been several local media reports interviewing people on the ground here who are saying, well, I felt like the stay-home order was over. So this is why we're seeing a very unusual trend here, because previously, when there were states of emergency in Japan, which sounds very dramatic, it's not a hard lockdown, but previously the measures that were imposed, such as businesses closing early, did allow cases to then drop off. But this time round, we're seeing the absolute opposite. And as you mentioned, over 3,000 cases, absolute record high. So they're believing that the Olympics, the relaxed atmosphere along the mixed messages is leading to that, along with the Delta variant, which is more infectious, and that is leading to a combination that could have serious repercussions for the medical system.
Right. Now, Phoebe, all this data and statistics is pointing to the fear that was raised actually before the Olympics began, which was that the Tokyo Games could, in a sense, become a super spreader event. And with the Delta variant now wreaking havoc, those fears have somewhat become more prolonged. Now, experts have warned that the holding of high-profile sports events sends a confusing message to the people of Japan about orders to stay at home. So is there going to be a revision of these orders? Are people even staying at home in the light of the Games being held in Tokyo?
Well, it's hard to say. The organisers have laid out the rules for the athletes and the staff, and they have to stick with those, although we have seen several revision and changes along the way. For example, the revision to the rule over close contacts. There were so many athletes who were arriving with people on planes into Japan with someone on that flight testing positive that they had to revise the rules on that front to allow them, if they tested negative 6 hours before a tournament, to compete. As for the general public, there could be further restrictions introduced. There have been no concrete plans laid out. But what's really clear is that the measures in place right now aren't enough. And there is a fair amount of resentment, I think, among the people, particularly those working in the hospitality industry, restaurants and bars. They have to shut by 8 p.m. and they've been banned from selling alcohol. But this is not having any impact on the cases, so it shows that these measures are no longer enough. Despite this, the government is expected to make a decision as early as Friday to put Saitama, Chiba and Kanagawa, these are the three prefectures surrounding Tokyo, they're looking to put those under a state of emergency as well. Whether this will do more to hammer home the message that this really is an emergency or not, that remains to be seen.
Right, Phoebe, thank you for all your inputs and thank you for joining us on WION at this hour. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.